Alright, we got the nut kit for the hub, and the bearings are in, and the first thing that needs to go in is this washer, which is indexed to the axle. It takes the force from the adjusting and retaining nuts and applies it evenly to the edge of the bearing and keeps the bearing from being as likely to spin on the axle because it's indexed in there. So that's the first thing in. The next thing is an inner nut with which to make the bearing adjustment.
Is that different from the outer, or are they the same?
In this case, the nuts are the same. There is a different one of these arrangements where there is a difference, but not on this one. And so our retaining adjusting nut here, I'll take in by hand and try to get to zero load. Spin it a few times. And once you get close, we want to come to zero lash and zero preload, which is when this nut just stops turning. And in the course of tightening it, we want to rotate the bearings. It's not so, well, it's always important, but it's not as important during the approach as it is right now. Right now I'm at zero end play, light preload, and I need to center the rollers on the inside and outside bearings by making at least 2 complete turns, and it centers every one of those Timken tapered rollers in their races. Now I can make a real adjustment, and you first want to bring it up snug. And this, by the way, is a really long pivot. It doesn't take much out there to put a lot of torque on such a long pivot. Even the weight of the handle adds to the down pressure we're applying. So I know I'm completely snug, and in fact I've got some preload on it. There's virtually no end play, but now I need to create the preload that I really want. And to do that, get my tool back in. I'm snug. I need to back off to where I now know right where zero is. I probably got a little knocking end play there, although I can't feel it. You can see just the weight of the drum is rotating. This is not enough, but we're right up against it. We know that. So I'm going to come forward until I start feeling resistance, and see I've got some resistance. That's what I call zero right there. No preload, no end play, and that's not enough for the finished product. So I'm going to apply a little preload here. Now I'm doing a very little, and I'll tell you why. And in fact, I'm done. I only went a little. You saw how little it was, a few degrees. The bearing is in, the washer's in, the nut is on. The nut is 0 plus preload. You know, I brought it down to 0, and then I gave it some preload. I didn't give it as much as it needs in the finished product, but I'll tell you how it's going to get that finished preload. When we put this lock washer on, that has an indexed inside lip on it, and all these little ears sticking out around it, one of those is going to line up with one of these when we get this properly adjusted, and we'll find whichever one it is, because they're all oddly spaced compared to these evenly spaced ones. And we'll bend that outer tab into this notch to keep this outer lock nut from coming off. And the washer itself is indexed to the axle, so none of that can rotate. Well, at this stage we've got the washer in, and we're about to put on this second nut. Well, think about what happens to the first nut when you tighten this lock nut. For one thing, you're pushing against the face of that washer, but you're also, the only thing that stops this outer nut from going in is the inner nut. When we tightened the inner nut to give a little bit of preload, the nut is pushing out on the threads on the load tube in order to push in on the bearing. But when we tighten this outer nut and push on that inner nut, we're not done tightening the outer nut until we've moved the inner nut further in far enough to get to the other side of the threads on the load tube. Understand what I'm saying?
So it's pushing against the threads going the opposite direction and not this direction.
Yeah, the nut, the inside adjusting nut, is currently being pushed out by the bearing against the outer edge of the threads on the load tube. And as you know, when you've got a nut on threads, you can move it back and forth a little because it's not a super tight fit. Well, when I tighten this outer one, it's going to take that inner nut and push it to the other side of its slop and make it a little bit tighter. And it's a concept that you don't realize or think about. And so what you do is you set the inside nut right where you want it. Then you put on the washer and the outside nut, and when you hog down on that lock nut, you have just pushed the inner nut in a little bit and increased your preload, maybe beyond where you wanted it to be. So since I know that that's what's going to happen, when I now tighten this outer nut, I'm going to add some preload because it's going to push on that inner nut some more. Well, I've compensated for that by preloading it just a little bit light. Because I know it's going to be a little bit more than whatever it is right now. And right now it's fine. If I did nothing else, it's fine. But I know it's going to go a little bit higher on preload when I tighten this nut. And if you didn't have that experience and had never done it, you wouldn't realize that's what's about to happen. I want to see if our tool is hooking into our edge of our teeth. You know, we got some bent ones on the other one. And I think it is. I don't want to tear them up. You know, there's times when I can feel the nut turning, but I'm trying to stay away from those bending those teeth over too. It's a funny fit. Yeah, we're right there.
And that's on the new one.
Yeah. Yeah, I see it hitting up on that one a little.
I guess that might explain why those are kind of bent to the side, huh?
Yeah.
Maybe to me.
Let's radius the outside of this so that
Yeah?
it doesn't hang on. Yeah. I'm going to look for another one. I might have one that's
Okay.
a little bit different dimension. This could be Ford or something.